Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Get Real with Jack and Cindy. I'm Cindy Morrison.
I'm Jack Wallace. Welcome. So we were actually doing our last week's podcast, and I kept having to get on to Cindy because she was jumping ahead to this week's
I
subject.
forgot what we were doing the next week, so I kept circling back to it.
That's just how we are, though. We just talk. I mean, it really you really are just hearing a conversation between us. That's just what's happening.
And we give our best secrets during this podcast. A couple of times we've ended the podcast. I'm like, did I just tell all the other agents to do that? Because that was a really good little secret I had.
It's a good one, but gatekeeping isn't our thing.
No, it's not.
We talk too much. So the one thing I really wanted to talk about, and what we really want to talk about, is repairs. There's a couple of things right now that are hot buttons, and one of them is, like we talked about the interest rate issue. It's a big issue.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing is that getting the house sold can be pretty easy or hard, whichever, but it's getting through the repairs, the inspections and the repairs, and then negotiating the repairs. So
and be realistic, whether you're a buyer or a seller. Sellers, that you've had neglect on your house if you've done deferred maintenance. Yeah. Buyers, you're not buying a new house. You're not buying a new car, you're buying a used car. Yeah. So there are going to be some things that aren't perfect about it.
Absolutely. And then let's just discuss how it works. So you sign a contract we're going to be specific to Oklahoma. If you're outside of Oklahoma, I'm sure it works similar in that, but this is how we do it here. So the contract, everybody signs, and then there's an agreed upon, the pre-fill is 10 days, but you can change that.
And there's actually, and I want to stop you there. I'm sorry. No, one thing that bothers me is when I get a contract in, because it says in the contract, inspections will start on this date. And a lot of buyer's agents leave that blank. So it's really hard to tell exactly when those 10 days are that you have your inspections. I like to do it where we sign the contract and I give 3 to 5 days.
Right.
And put that
so
next
the contract
date.
States 3 days from the last signature is the beginning of the effective date, which is the beginning of inspection period, which is the beginning of that 10-day clock. So I hear what you're saying, but like for me, I always just go off of 3 days past the signature, which also gets blurry because people are like, well, do you count the one day they signed or do you do it the next day?
And when they initial the changes and
it's not the initials, it's the signature.
Yeah, but I like a very clear date.
But I want to clear that up because I know this now legally. It is the signature because it's of the 3 days of the last signature, because the initials are cleaning up things. Now, if the initial was something substantial like a change to the price
or disclosure.
If it changes the absolute nature of the contract, then you could use that. If somebody goes, wait a minute, I'm not going to pay this, I'm going to, and then the people go, okay, and they've already signed, which is really rare that it would be behind the last signature. But if it is, then, because most people, when they're countering, do the change and then they sign the final. And so it's usually that date. But if it was a cleanup thing, like someone forgot to initial by the seller's legal name, that doesn't count. It's that last signature. Okay. So then it's 3 days from that. Then you have 10 days according to the contract, unless left blank. And then you have 1 day beyond that to get the reports all back and get prepared. So you basically, from the last signature, have 14 days, not 14 business days, but 14 actual days, including holidays and including the weekend.
Now, I don't like to leave anything to chance. So, like I said,
and that's great.
I fill in, let's say we've all signed the contract on a Sunday, and sometimes you start the contract, but then, it takes several days to hammer everything out. So I give plenty of time before the start of the inspections. I also do 10 business days ever since COVID instead of 10 days. Because if you have a structural inspection.
Well, if you're setting the clock, that would be a similar thing. If you're setting the clock instead of counting on that 3-day leeway, then that would actually make sense too, because you're kind of, what I'm saying? Like you're giving yourself some leeway. The problem is you have to be careful, because sometimes you can start going where you give so many days. And the buyer thinks that's great because they have all these days to get something done. But you also are taking a chance on it being off the market for that amount of time, and then the buyer just changes their mind, or you have all of those days and then the seller has to get bids and repairs done, and it's like suddenly you're 10 days till closing and there's like stuff that has to be done and you have no way of getting it done in time.
And
So
even though I ask for 10 business days, I try to schedule my inspection on that for the first 3 days of the inspection period. So we can know if we need to have other inspections, but just in case it needs a structural. And I mean, I've had those, they couldn't do it until the 10th day.
Right.
And now you're panicking.
Right.
And then also what I do.
And it's hard because when it's busy, every inspector is busy. And so it's like, it's like there's times when it's easy and there's times when it's really hard to get somebody. And honestly, having multiple people that you can call on is really important.
Very important. And I've had sellers kick it back and say, no, they're only doing 10 days instead of 10 business days. Okay, well, I tried. Yeah. But then I also do a cover letter that explains the price, if it's contingent,
all the highlights,
and specifically inspections are this date to this date.
Right.
Because I've had an agent
and that's good. And everyone agrees
who wanted to argue.
Yeah. And then everyone agrees from the beginning that I do that. Sometimes I should do it all the time because it really does give everyone like, we agree these are the major dates.
And I have the seller's agent initial it. So because it's not a legal document, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. So there's no surprises. So that's what I do. But just because or
even I've done it where I've sent an email stating those things and just said, will you respond that you received this and that you agree with these? And then we can decide if you don't. But yeah, I mean, because you want to count on, because it's weird. Like, if it's on the first, then you start the clock on the second, or is it first to the second? Yeah, I mean,
exactly.
And it can make it, and it sounds like we're being like weird, but it can make a difference between legally somebody losing all their earnest money or getting their earnest money back. I mean, so it's important that you follow the contract. We call it following the contract. So there's that. And then the seller then we get a TRR, which is the treat, repair, replace document. And that's whether it needs treatment is whether it needs termite treatment or wood destroying organism treatment. And then you have obviously either repair or replace what's wrong. So then you go in and take the document that you've given, the buyer looks at it, and we then look at it, and then you decide what they want to ask the seller to do
out of that report.
And you are required to give that report with your return to show that those things have been, are an issue. I don't think you're required to show it. I don't know. It gets blurry on whether if you just back out. But you don't. The seller does not own the report that was given to them. It's kind of a weird deal too, because they don't own it, so they can't use it for another purchaser. But then again, if they have a disclosure issue, can they use that report? Because that's how they were made aware of something. So I think for disclosure, they should be able to use that, because if that's the reason the person's backing out because something wasn't disclosed that came up, well, then, I mean, that's an interesting.
But they're definitely going to have to add that into their disclosures because the seller now knows.
But as a backup of why you're saying this is an issue, to have that report, I think is interesting. So that we're getting into the weeds on that.
But I also ask if
can we use it?
Yeah, can we use that? I mean, you've already paid for it,
and a lot of times the buyer feels terrible because they don't want to back out, but they just can't accept
their finances
what it is.
didn't pan out or something.
Yeah. So then, okay, so we're looking at that. So let's talk about that's how the dynamic of it works. Then 7 days the seller has to, can be really tight, to get a professional to come out and give bids and tell you how much it's going to cost. And then you say, yeah, we agree to that. It is very important to get someone to really look at it and before you agree to it, because a lot of times people will say, yeah, I'll do that. And then they have no idea what it's going to cost. And then they freak out because, I'm not paying that much for that. And even sometimes when somebody comes and looks at it, then it can end up being more. So, I always say it's kind of like anything, add a little cushion onto that.
And this is where I think it's really important that you have an agent that's well connected and has handy person who can go over and check that, or a roofer that will go over and give, a free estimate. So you can collect that without having to spend a lot of money just figuring out how much all this is going to cost
And what's
you.
sad is we used to have a lot of people that were TRR people. We don't have that as much anymore, and I'll tell you why. Because during COVID, people would go and bid, and then people would go, we're just going to take money in lieu. And so the person who spent their time bidding out that job did it for free and then didn't get the job over and over and over. Or worse, they would do a kind of a price, and you have to split it up kind of per thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so they'd say, well, I'll take $20 to fix this and $50 to do this and blah, blah, blah. Well, then somebody would say, I just want that one thing done.
Mm-hmm.
And then their pricing, it doesn't work because they have to go to the house, do that one thing for $20. So that didn't work out for a lot of people. And then also then you get into people who want things done by licensed people, which I understand that. You should be really careful with that because
Mm-hmm.
it's a lot more trouble and a lot more expense to use licensed people on everything. And not everything needs that. If it's a handyman capable thing, then you don't need to. So a lot of times agents just write that over and over and over, like to cover themselves, but it creates, and a lot of times other agents just ignore that.
Mm-hmm.
And if they say that, you need to really state, we are not agreeing to use a licensed person, but this person is the reason we're going to use them. Or if they want that, they have to understand like that is so much more that there may be some things you can't do because it's too expensive. Yes. So that's where sometimes the money in lieu is good because they can go, you take this money and you do what you feel comfortable with, but we're not going to do a bunch of licensed people to do a bunch of stuff that doesn't need it.
And if you're an agent on the TRRs, I know a lot of times the seller's agent doesn't show up for the inspections. I highly recommend that you do or have a representative. I was at one inspection and they didn't realize that the bathroom upstairs, which they had never used, the shower drain was not actually connected to,
Wow.
You know where I'm going with this. The shower drain was not connected to the piping. And of course they turn on the showers and bathtubs and let them run for a long time. And the next thing I know, there is water pouring from the ceiling. So
a lot of times they won't even do those tests anymore because of that.
Right.
It's just awful because like then you run your shower and it's like, but it's like the water pan or the shower pan, it operates fine until it goes over a certain level. So it's like people have used it for a long time and there was never an issue, but then they do the shower pan and then it goes, those shower pans are interesting.
But I can't imagine the sellers coming back and I wasn't there and they came home to that mess.
Oh my God.
Because I was able to, stop everything immediately, have them come there. He was a plumber. So, he was able to fix the issue. Well, he didn't build his house. He didn't do the plumbing for his house.
Got it.
But
it hadn't been an issue or they just hadn't been using
it was an extra bedroom and bathroom upstairs they never used.
Ever. Interesting. Well, I've got an even better one. An agent at my office telling about, she's retired now for a long time, but she sold a new construction and she was like, you have got to have an inspection. I don't know who this builder is. I've never heard of him. No one has heard of this builder. And they're like, no, we don't have the money to do that. We're not going to do that. And then they got into the house. I'm not kidding. The powder bath, the toilet was just sitting on the floor. There was no drain underneath it.
Oops.
I mean, and you can't fix that. Like,
Yeah.
I mean,
you now have a bathroom without a toilet. What is that?
And then whenever they went
quarter
to go,
bath? I
they
don't know.
went to
Instead
go
of a
back
bath?
out to the builder, and it was built under an LLC, and he was long gone.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Inspections will save you so much money.
Well, even for builders, I always tell them, look, it can be a pain, and you feel like you're being picked apart. But the truth is, what they're really doing for you is finding a bunch of stuff that could be little warranty stuff that you're going to be called over and over as it comes up. And instead, you're going to have everybody go in and do it all one time before closing, and then you don't have to do those again.
Yep.
So I think it works out well for the builders. And sometimes you have to fight because the inspector has this idea, and the builder, it's like the guys that I work with, my super superintendent was a city inspector forever. And so it's kind of fun because he'll get into the weeds with these guys like, no, that is not true. And inspectors know a little bit about a whole lot. So that's the one thing to remember too. Take everything with a grain of salt, because they're like seeing something that looks a little bit off, but they're not 100% sure because they're not a specialist in HVAC. They're not a specialist in plumbing. They just know a whole lot about, a little about a lot.
And let's talk about the different kinds of inspections, because your basic inspection is basically going to be, let me see if I can say basically at least 3 more times.
Yeah.
You're going to have your inspector and then generally termite inspection.
So EMP is what we're talking about, electrical, mechanical, plumbing?
Yes, for a general inspection. They're just generally going to go over everything. I'll use generally 3 or 4 times too. But
generally, you will use generally.
But as you decide you need to do more or want to do more, I mean, I had one inspection where I swear I had the sellers, and I think there were 14 people that came through that house within the 10 days. But if you have a pool, you can do a pool inspection. If it's, for instance, an older home in Midtown, you can have somebody snake
the video of that's a big one right now, and I kind of understand it, where they're doing a lot of videoing of the drains and all that in the house.
The drains, the sewer, all of that, because in these older neighborhoods, there may be some breakdown. There may be tree roots that have grown into your sewer system.
And it's really kind of just depends on the house and you how much they've maintained it, and if they've had some things happen that they've had to do some repairs, and about those. I mean, you can kind of base it on some of those things. But and the problem is you can spend so much money doing inspections, and like what is overkill and what is appropriate.
Sure.
And I don't have an answer for that. I think that is based on everyone's, need.
If you have a septic system, they can do the septic system.
Yeah.
I usually like to call out an extra roofer, just to, because sometimes inspectors won't actually crawl on the roof. I want somebody to get up there and look at everything, make sure the masonry is great with the chimney. And then if you, some people will call in a structural inspector from the very beginning. And generally what my clients have done, we do a basic inspection. And then if that inspector says, hey, there are some issues here that need to be looked, or if I know it needs piers or has piers, I can tell the neighborhood has a lot of piering, then I'll suggest the structural inspection from the beginning.
Yeah. The other thing too is I always think it's like, there's a whole home where they look at your windows. There's EMP where they don't. You need to talk to the inspector. Have the client, or you as a client, need to talk to the inspection company and ask them what their different tiers and what all is covered. That's really, so what you want to look at and see what you feel like. Whether the windows open and close properly, whether their seals are broken. I mean, that's there's all different parts of that. But then the other thing that we need to stress, though, is these are living organisms. Houses are living organisms, and they are going to have issues. And the inspector's job is to find anything that would be alarming or possibly alarming. And so it always feels a little bit overwhelming whenever you're being told this is what's wrong with your house. It's like, get so excited about your new house. Now here's what's wrong with it.
Right.
And I think it always kind of gut punches people. So, I always tell people their job is to tell you that your house is sick. Like if they don't, people feel like they didn't earn their money.
Right.
So I think it's really important to be prepared that that's going to be the case. But let's talk about, we talked a little bit about this before. So when someone says to your seller, this offer is as is, then what does that mean to your seller when he's negotiating or she's negotiating in the beginning of the contract?
What that means for the buyers, do the inspection anyway. Please, 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 please. If you buy something as is, don't just skip the inspection because you assume they're not going to pay for anything.
Right.
If it's something major, the seller is probably going to have to fix it, or they're going to have to disclose it and fix it for the next person.
And according to the standard Oklahoma contract, you have the right to do that even if you've written in as is, unless you have marked out all of the part about the inspections and the TRR and everyone has initialed it, then that really is truly as is. You have bought the house.
Okay. Who does that?
I've had it happen.
What?
I've had it happen because whenever the deal was made, they were really like, here's where it would really be. Like, I'm tearing the house down. I'm just going to use the land.
Well, that makes sense.
So I don't really care in it. And even though I have to write a contract as it's a house, I don't really care about that. We're going to X that out. Or somebody knows the house was burned in a fire and they're going to go in and redo it, but they know like it's too much of a mess to even try to figure out what's wrong. So we're just going to go ahead and we're going to take it. And that's appealing to the seller, and they may take less money because someone's willing to do that. So there's always an appropriate time for some things. Very rarely, because you really don't know. And then, but the other side too, if you're a buyer and you're using that tactic to get the price down, have some honor, because there's going to be some things that come up that you took it as is. If you find something major, great. I understand. I'm either out or we need this fixed. But if there's a bunch of little stuff that was kind of why they agreed as is, because they didn't want to do all that little stuff.
And a lot of times you'll have older buyers that, they just don't want to make all those repairs. Now they could offer money in lieu of repairs, but if they've said as is, they really mean as is, unless there's something major.
But it can even get worse, because like you have the seller will start packing their stuff up, or they got staging, they get rid of the staging, and then the person comes back because they think it's a done deal and says, I want all these little things fixed for them. And then the seller's in this terrible position.
Yes.
Because they have to go, well, if I don't accept that, then I just think you have to be really careful with that as is. I think that's a really overused, and I think that it very rarely is a smooth thing.
And it used to be the kiss of death. I mean, if you put as is in there, you're like, okay, this house sucks.
Yeah, I was a seller.
Then COVID happened.
Very rarely would I suggest as a seller you put that in your descriptions, unless there's an issue that you're disclosing and you're just not going to deal with it. That's a different deal. But to do it because you just don't want to do any repairs, what it does say to people is that house has got something that I don't want to deal with. It does. It gives an echo. I'm talking more like the buyer negotiating in the contract. Oh, we'll take it as is.
Right.
Like if the seller's going between you and someone else, you're like, but we'll do it as is. So they take your offer instead of this other offer, and then you end up being not truly taking it as is.
Right.
And a lot of times that's because the agent doesn't explain to the buyer what as is really means.
Agreed.
So that's on agents. You need to explain to them what you mean by as is, and make sure everyone is on the same page. As is sounds great, but it needs to really be defined what that means.
Agreed.
That's a hot button for me. Can you tell? Done this a long time, and that is like it's awful whenever, because it's like people, and then you have these two very adversarial scenarios all of a sudden where people are like, I'm being messed with, and I agreed to something that I'm not getting. So that's the big one. But let's also discuss, like, when is it time to walk away? When is it a good buy, and when is it a good bye-bye? Like, I think that's really important. So first of all, it first and foremost depends on the comfort level of the buyer 100%. So like, what's a good buy to me and a good bye-bye to me is going to be different than it is to a lot of people. But some things are big. There are some things that you just go, I am not comfortable with this. If it's major structural things, and you're going to have, and you're paying, let's say you're paying a high price for something. Let's say you're already at the top of the price for the neighborhood. Then you find some major structural stuff and they're like willing to do some work. I would really think about that, because you're going to have to then claim that there was structural work that had to be addressed, and then you're already paying at a high side. The other thing that always is a little bit alarming to me, and I think that should be really looked at, is if there was already structural issues that had been addressed, and now they've inspected 4 years later, 5 years later, and they found more structural stuff that needs to be addressed. Are we in a trend here that's going to keep going, and you're going to take that on? You're really trying to not buy future problems. future maintenance is just going to be part of it. You're going to have to maintain a house.
You have to spend money if you're a homeowner.
That's
you
part
just
of
do.
it. You're never, and like the air conditioning could be great today, and then you get it inspected, it's great, and it breaks next week. And I've had that happen. I mean,
I've had things like that happen right after the contract signed, and you're like,
no one did anything wrong. It's just the way life works. But when it's something like that, where you have like a major structural that had, like I had a house one time that had 15 piers. It wasn't a big house. Had 15 piers, and then we had an inspection, and the people were like, I'm a little bit worried about that, but I'm okay because, at least it was fixed. And then we go and inspections, and they're like, it needs 5 more on the other side, and we need to have those other 15 looked at because they're moving a little bit. No.
Yeah.
That was a let's get out. And you feel terrible for the seller because bless their heart.
Right.
But I just think that that's one thing that if you're seeing a trend in the house that is not good and they keep trying to fix it, and that isn't. And so like the other thing too, if a house has been just recently repainted and redone, that's great because you have new paint. But what it also can be a sign is, and you need to be aware of, like if you're looking in the corners around the doors and there's a lot of mud and they fan it out, but it's mud. Was that just done recently, or was that done a long time ago when they fixed something?
And you can't tell in Oklahoma because we do have earthquakes. You can't always tell whether it's structural or something like an earthquake or the house settling. That's where we are not inspectors, but that inspection is so important. And one thing,
and reading your disclosures, really reading them before you agree to a contract. I think a lot of times people sign contracts and then they read the disclosure. I'm like, well, that was in the disclosures. You should have read that. And that's honestly not even our job necessarily to be pushing you on that, because your interpretation of the disclosures is really your interpretation. I mean, I'm going to point things out, obviously, but in general, that's on you. So we're providing that for you, and you need to read that.
You mentioned piers. I don't think piers are something necessarily to be frightened of. Some
and we live
soil,
in Oklahoma with 7 soil types, and they diverge. It's going to be part of it.
Exactly. What I do suggest is if the house needs piers, I suggest, and you tell me if you feel differently, that the piering be done before you close. Don't take the money and do the piering later, because when they put the house back in place, you can have a window that breaks. You can have cracks that happen that need to be fixed and painted. So I'm pretty adamant with my clients that we get that piering done so they know everything's fine. We can do the final walkthrough, have a structural inspector come through if they would like and look at everything. But any side effects from that piering will need to be fixed.
Other thing too, my dad was a builder, and the one thing that he was always suspect about some piers, because he's like, well, I don't know about that because you're just holding this part here steady, but this other part is moving. So what is that doing to that? So, somebody who's really not a pier salesman, but a structural engineer to come up with the plan is a really smart way to think of that.
There are only certain piering companies I will use.
Well, and then the other side of it is, okay, so let's say you get a house and they say, yeah, it has piers, but they are lifetime guarantee. Get the information, make sure that piering company is still around and it's still under warranty.
Because I've had the piering company go out of business.
A lot of them. And, or they get sold off and no one knows who is responsible. So, and the seller is not doing something bad. They were told there was a lifetime warranty when they bought it, when they did it. And now suddenly that company is gone.
And sometimes if you do it before closing, they can write it such that, let's say there's not the warranty is not transferable.
Right.
Then they can, once it closes, they can write the warranty in the name of the buyers. So now they have that warranty instead of the sellers who just sold their house.
And if you buy a house that has a transferable warranty for the piers, you need to make sure that got transferred to you. I mean, there's a lot of things that we just kind of say, yeah, it used to be great. It's going to be, but it's like, no, what does that mean? And that's one right now that's a really big one, because there's a lot of piering companies across the country that went out because they did the piers, they didn't hold, and then they lost out. So, so yeah, make sure you have that as number one. And then the other thing too, that I think it just keeps kind of showing up is, so houses during COVID, a lot of them were bought without repairs. That was
Mhm.
kind of a way to get going and to move through it.
And to beat the other offers.
To beat the other offer,
Mhm.
right. And so a lot of that happened. A lot of that happened. And then also people weren't wanting to be in close quarters with workmen. And I mean, it was a lot of things, right? So, but the point is that those repairs didn't get done. A lot of times they didn't even do inspections, unfortunately.
And this was 5 years ago. So
yeah, and it
lot
kind
can
of
happen in
lasted a
5
while
years.
because, as long as we had those 3% interest rates, it was just, it wasn't COVID. It was the 3% interest rate, like the craze of people getting into houses. So suddenly those houses are now coming back on the market, and very rarely did those sellers or buyers end up doing the work that was supposed to be done.
Mm-hmm.
They were like, well, we know that's a problem, but then guess what? They forgot that was a problem. They just kind of live with it. Like we all have a tendency to do with our own house. You just kind of live with some stuff. It's always funny. I'm like, are there anything that doesn't work? No, it's all great. And then, oh, what about the light in the kitchen? Oh, well, if you hold your tongue like that and you stand on one foot, it'll work. I'm like, that's a disclosure issue. But in their mind, I understand because they're like, I can make it work. I just have to jiggle it to the right and jiggle it to the left, right? But so a lot of the buyers didn't do anything. So now those houses are coming up and those issues were not addressed and they're worse and there's more. And so there is quite a bit coming up. And so as a seller, if you took advantage of that and you got that, that's not this new buyer's fault.
Right.
Like and I've had people get really upset. I'm like, well, where's your inspection from when you bought it? And then they'll give me the inspection from when they bought it, and all the stuff was called out. And I'm like, well, why wasn't this fixed? And they go, well, we just negotiated so it wouldn't have to be. And I'm like, but then why didn't you fix it? And why are you angry at the buyer for now wanting these things fixed that you should have fixed? And I mean, it's an interesting dilemma.
And you
that
walked
we're
away
into.
with an extra $5,000 to,
or got the deal to go through. Yeah.
You took the money. You just didn't do the repairs. You're going to have to pay Paul instead of rob Peter.
And
so
you really didn't disclose these things because in your mind you don't remember. Like I don't think you're doing anything bad. You just didn't remember it. But now that we remember it and we have written proof that you should remember it, that's on you. So I think that we're getting into a weird zone with that. It's really interesting. And I think the one thing that everyone gets upset about inspections, like all the sellers get upset about inspections. And a lot of times we as realtors do because it feels like they're, being so nitpicky. But the reason we want inspections is because it keeps houses in the community up to standard, and it's kind of like a car that no one ever drove that sat in a garage for 30 years and was never started. Just because it was never driven for 30 years does not mean that's a better car than one that was meticulously maintained and used. Same thing with houses. Like, I'm bad. I've lived in my house forever. I probably should have inspections occasionally just so they go through everything. Cause you don't know it's not working, right? Until somebody goes, that's not working. Well, even your sprinkler system. Like who sits and watches their sprinkler? I make my poor yard guy. I make him look at my sprinkler every spring and go and run every zone and look at every head.
That's great.
And make sure it's not hitting the house, because I've had too many inspections where some head wasn't working and the grass kept dying in that area, or it was hitting the windowsill and rotting it out. I'm like, you've got to pay attention to that. And it's like, it runs in the middle of the night. No one ever sees it.
Yeah.
We just assume it works, but not the way it should.
So there were two things you brought up. Disclosures. Okay. So remind me, I'm going to go back. Well, I'll start with that one because that's the one I can remember. As a seller, please disclose everything you know about the house. Spend a little time on that document because it is hard. I mean, I've been in my house 27 years. It would be hard to remember every single thing that's happened and has been fixed. But please, to the best of your knowledge, write those things down. So one, the buyer knows what they're getting into. And two, lawsuits come off of that disclosure. If you keep something away from the buyer and it becomes a problem, it can become a real financial problem for you in the future as a seller.
With that being said, if you fix something like, let's say you had a leak under the sink 4 years ago and you had that repaired, that's not really like you had it repaired and now it's in normal working order. If you had a sewer backup and you had raw sewage in your house and you had that fixed, that would be something that you would disclose. If you ever had an insurance claim on your house and you got it fixed, that's a disclosure.
And if you think they won't find out, guess what?
Yes.
They do a search on the claims that have been done on the house. And I actually just had one where the buyers came and said, well, there's this $15,000 insurance claim. I'm like, wait, what? So I call my seller. It turns out it wasn't their house. It had gotten mislabeled
But
from
you
the
need to do
address,
that.
but they're going to find out. So
Yeah, and then I will say, like the clue, it's called a clue report, and then they run it, and what's the kiss of death is water.
Mhm.
Like when you have water issues, like if you have some stuff in your house that is water damage that you can just fix and it's no big deal instead of going through your insurance, I think a lot of times, I'm not saying every time, I mean, there's just things that come up, but a lot of times you're better off to just fix it if it's not a big deal, because even if it was something that really wouldn't be an ongoing issue in the future, but it showed up as a claim,
Mhm.
it can be very hard to get insurance. I mean, the insurance companies are so hard right now. And I can understand they're already dealing with all these natural disasters and fires in Florida and all that. So they're also, crazy. But like I've even some communities where they're having a hard time getting their roofs replaced because they had so many claims that the insurance companies don't have the money to do it. And they've been paying these high premiums and they just aren't. So, I mean, like they're really picky about that stuff. So it's important to know what you're getting when you're buying and make sure your insurance is going to cover that.
And make sure your home insurance does not lapse. I don't care if it's the middle of summer and there are no Oklahoma thunderstorms coming through. Please don't let that lapse, because you know what will happen. There'll be a grass fire.
Have you
There'll
had
be
that
lightning.
happen?
No, but
I was gonna say, my gosh, that's
no.
funny. I'm like, yeah, that would be scared to death.
But yeah, I mean,
In
health
Oklahoma?
insurance, your home insurance, don't let
Yeah.
them lapse, because sure enough, that is when something will happen.
The good news for me is that having a mortgage, it all gets paid through my mortgage. So I don't even think about it.
Yeah, me
But
too.
it's like, yeah, but if you have it and you don't, or if you have so much money that you can self-insure, like if you have a bunch of rental properties and you're
Mhm.
like, I'm going to self-insure, I understand that can be beneficial right now because it is so expensive to have insurance that there might be, it's also interesting. Even when you have rental property, you want them spread out over geographic areas so that if a storm comes through one neighborhood,
Mhm.
everything doesn't get hit. But no, so that's a big one. Like doing your inspections based on kind of knowing whether or not you're going to be able to get insurance
Mhm.
is a big one. So your roof, obviously, and then getting your insurance company to come and pre-inspect is very difficult now.
Yes.
Very difficult. And so what used to, we kind of have your insurance company look at it and they'd give you a quote and you didn't have a surprise. But now you can buy a house and then they go, oh no, we're not covering that.
Mhm.
So that's a big one.
So the other thing I was thinking of, and you brought me full circle back around to it.
I'm so glad.
If you have a home that maybe you've had deferred maintenance or you're not sure what's wrong with it, you can do a pre-inspection.
Yes.
And on a lot of my properties, I highly recommend it because they have no idea what kinds of
somebody like me
repairs.
who's lived for 18 years, I should do a pre-inspection if I ever decide to sell because I just don't know. I just haven't had people going through it with a fine-tooth comb in years and years.
And it's peace of mind on both sides. So as the seller, when you do a pre-inspection, you know what needs to be fixed and you can go ahead and be proactive. As a buyer, you know that a pre-inspection has done, you're looking at receipts of what has been fixed.
Mm-hmm.
And then a lot of those companies will charge them less to come back out and do a final walkthrough just to make sure everything's working the way it should be. So a lot of times that's a great strategy for selling your home.
And like I always tell people will make a $500 problem into a $5,000 problem.
Mm-hmm.
They'll make a $50 problem into a $500 problem because in their mind, that's going to cost 10 times, although any more than inflation, maybe it's not, or maybe it's the same. But the point is, if you get it fixed before, it's not an issue. It's kind of like if you have a light fixture that you don't want to sell with a house, it's best. I know sometimes you can't, but it's best to take it out because then the people will get fixated on it and want to buy it. Or,
and they
the
have
house.
to have it. They want that house because of that light fixture.
So with repairs, if you have them done, then and you don't have to disclose anything, you're much better off.
And I do have a side note to that. If you decide there's this light fixture that you absolutely love, it has to stay with you. It is leaving that house with you.
Or it was your grandmother's.
It was your grandmother's. have somebody come in and let you know how much it's going to cost to take that chandelier out and move it. Because I've had twice somebody's wanted to reserve a chandelier, didn't want to change it out before selling, and it was reserved. And then they found out how much it was going to be to take it out and move it to the new location. They're like, never mind, you can have it. Pool tables too.
But
Pool
then
tables.
but then does the buyer want it? Because
Yeah.
you've agreed to remove it. I mean, that's the catch-22. Sometimes then suddenly the buyer's like, I hate that and I don't want to pay that.
These were
So,
fantastic light fixtures. So they
yeah,
definitely
that's
wanted
good.
them. And I think it added value to the house. But, just before you decide I have to have that, just make sure you know all the costs
Yeah.
involved.
And I think what
with
we're
taking
really
that with
basically
you.
saying is knowledge is power across the
Yes.
board. But the other side too is, every inspection company is going to find different things. So the one thing sometimes is like you can do the inspections, they find you got all the stuff fixed, and then you think, well, I'm done. And then the other company comes and says, well, this and this and this is also a problem. And you're like, I mean, people get
Wait,
upset.
what?
So I think some people have that, like, would just rather, wait and see if they've been taking pretty good care of it. But so then we get into, once we've gone through the process of the inspections and we're into the gathering information, getting people to look, and then negotiating what we will or will not do.
Mm-hmm.
So oftentimes deals blow not because the repairs were terrible, but because the way it was handled between the parties, oftentimes between the realtors too, was terrible.
Especially the realtors.
Because I feel like the sellers feel like they're being attacked and nickeled and dimed, and the buyers feel like they're being cheated and they were lied to. So it's very important to try to not go from that standpoint, unless that is the case, which sometimes it is. But if it's really two parties trying to do their best, trying to be them, like I always tell people, you don't want me to be as upset as you are. I know you want me to be this upset because you want me to feel your pain. But if I'm this upset, you might as well do it yourself. Like,
right.
I can't help this deal go forward successfully the way you want if my hair is on fire just as much as yours is. So whenever things come up, it's like I always say, there's no good news, there's no bad news, there's just news. So this is what we're dealing with. This is what they want. Now, my job sometimes as a realtor is to direct you to people that can go, what they want is going to cost a whole lot more than what would fix it. And here's what I would propose. Then you have to go back and figure out if you can get into an agreement on which repair is acceptable and if it's palatable to both sides. But too often what happens is people just automatically go into, I'm just mad and I'm not going to do that. And they'll, and usually it's the seller.
Oh, yeah.
That just is like, I'm not doing that and I'm done. And sometimes that works. I mean, sometimes it does. Sometimes the buyer's like, well, I just love the house and I'm going to take it anyways. But most of the time, then suddenly you've got a buyer that goes, I'm suspicious of you now. And I feel like I did my good faith. I put money into this inspection. Sellers act like the buyer's just asking it for fun. They spent $1,000 to get information that now they are wanting compensation towards a repair. So they've done due diligence on their side and they have put skin in the game. Because a lot of times the seller's like, well, they have no skin in the game. Yes, they do. They have the skin in the game of what they paid for that inspection.
Right.
Which is substantial. I mean, it is. So anyways, that's one of the first things. As a buyer, though, I think so much of the time, like, you knew it was an older house. You knew there's going to be some stuff. You negotiate the price to get them to take. So, like, asking for every little thing and then anything that is just recommended future maintenance stuff, that's not really the seller's responsibility.
And it is not, I just got a TRR with this. They wanted $10,000 in lieu of the HVAC, the water heater, the this, the that.
Because they were old?
Because they were old. And I'm like, that is not, it's still in working order. I'm sorry,
Normal
again, you're
order.
not buying a new house.
Yeah. And when you looked at the house, you saw those and you understood that they were older.
Yep.
Like, that's where I get into a problem. You went through that house, you saw that they were older. Now, maybe they were a little older than you thought, but you saw that they were older. You wanted a home warranty. Maybe we negotiate that.
And that is exactly what we did,
Yeah.
because I called the agent back and I said, all of those things are in working order.
But that's a good agent. That's good agents working together going,
yes.
Okay, legitimate concern on your part. Here's a legitimate answer that everybody can kind of live with.
And that's what I said. I said, how about we do a home warranty? That way this buyer has peace of mind, and my sellers aren't shelling out $10,000 for things that already work.
Yeah. Well, and then, there's good home warranties and there's not so good home warranties.
True that.
And so you really want to make sure you're, it's something that they really are getting that's going to be a good thing. But then the other side of it too, if you're a buyer, this happens all the time. I think it's so sad. A lot of times people buy the house, they get the home warranty for free, or, they get it paid for by the seller the first year. And then when it comes renewal, they don't renew it. And then something breaks.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you're going to do that, you really should be paying it every year until something goes wrong.
I've had one for 15, 20 years on my house.
I had a lot of stuff replaced. It's terrible, but I had so much replaced that I kind of stopped doing it because it was like, well, everything's been replaced that I would want to. Now it's time to go back and do a new one. But no, that's a good way to look at, here's what they want. That's going to be, $60,000 to do upgrades, right, or a $750. And I've even had people do a $750 or $800 home warranty, and then another $800 towards closing costs, which is really their way of giving you 2 years of that home warranty. I mean, there's ways to work that, because it's like, but as a seller, it is interesting because, okay, but is that going to be like an issue? And
right,
was that a lot of the reason why people weren't making offers? Were they concerned about the age of those those units?
And we had considered that in the price.
Yeah.
As well. It's, but yeah, if you want a new water heater and HVAC and all of that, go buy a new house.
So how do you feel about putting in like carpeting concession?
I'm just going to say it depends on what the carpet looks like.
Yeah, it's a hard one. I mean, I really have a hard time with this because I think in one respect, it lets people know you're willing to make the change. In another respect, it just draws attention to something, like it may not be an issue to somebody and then you're making it an issue. So,
but like if it's clear your pets had a lot of issues, and as I tell my sellers, you can replace the carpet, but you may replace it with a color they don't want or a kind that they don't want. So at least giving an allowance for that says, okay, we acknowledge this, but we want you to be able to pick it out.
But that's also big. Sorry to interrupt.
No, you're fine.
If you have a carpet allowance in the MLS and then someone makes an offer and they don't put the carpet allowance in the contract and you negotiate, you are not responsible for that carpet allowance. If they want that, they need to put that in the contract. But I think it's very important to say, at this price, are you talking about wanting or not wanting that allowance? And if you want it, you need to put it in there, because again, bottom line is what we're interested in for the seller. And I've had this happen where where people backed out of a deal because their agent didn't write in the carpet allowance, but they assumed because it was on MLS, and my sellers were like, no, we agreed to a much lower price than we would have, but they didn't ask for the carpet allowance. And it's blurry, but I'll tell you what, I never did that again. I always made clear, and then there's that part of you that thinks, well, do I bring it up? Because if I bring it up, I'm introducing that into it. But it's like, yes, you bring it up because you've already brought it up by putting it on MLS.
Well, and I have forgot to write in the fridge in what things that are included, because on MLS it said the fridge.
Yeah.
As I was early in my career, I didn't know. I mean, it's obvious. It says it's going with the house. So are you taking the gas logs too? Like,
And that used to hold up, that if it had been listed on MLS, whatever, that used to hold up.
Well, I learned when the agent called and said, hey, we just wanted to check. They're about to take the fridge. And I'm like, what? And so
Yeah.
now, any of those things that are listed on MLS, I just include them in the inclusion. So there's no question.
Yeah. And I do think that one probably would be a hard one to fight as the seller, because that is like kind of, you've just checked off the things in the house. You know what I mean? Like, I think that'd be, but it's a little, but again, don't leave it to chance. Yeah. I mean, I think that's the contract needs to be as clear as possible
and as simple as possible.
But here's the other side too.
Hopefully.
Like if you have an old refrigerator that you're going to throw into the deal, like if somebody asked for the fridge and it wasn't included, I also will put refrigerator included, but not warranted. So in other words, the buyer, yes, you can have the refrigerator, but they're not sure how well it works. They're not sure. I mean, that they'll throw it in because you want it, but they're not going to guarantee it.
Right.
Because once you put it in, you sort of have to stand behind it.
Yeah, if it's not working. I never thought about that.
And so I'll even tell people sometimes if it's a refrigerator that's kind of on the blink, let's not include it. It's not expected. If they want to negotiate for it, then we'll negotiate and state that. Or washers and dryers that have been there for a long time.
Although, can I digress about refrigerators?
Us digress?
I know, shocking.
Yeah. Everybody wants to talk about refrigerators.
Why is it that the old refrigerator, the tried and true that you've had forever, I had one from my Aunt Barbara in our garage that outlasted two fridges in my kitchen that were brand new.
I saw a meme the other day that said, nothing in life, there's nothing that is immortal except a 1980s refrigerator. It's really true. I don't know. And it's scary because like they've almost become, they're expensive.
They're not super expensive.
They're not cheap, but they've really become sort of a disposable thing. Yeah. And then some of the techie, I'm not going to say which ones, but there's some of the really kind of techie names that have refrigerators. Oh my gosh. I've had clients that have had horrible problems, and then they don't stand behind them. Ooh. Like where they leak into the bin, and they'll be like, well, that's condensation. Well, it's like, yeah, all my vegetables are in water. I mean, it's a weird deal.
I'm drowning.
Yeah, I don't know. And that's the thing. I mean, and you do kind of have to think about that when it comes to things in your house now. There are some things that don't last like they used to. And so everybody's so quick to want to get a new replacement on something. Well, that may not be the best thing. Yeah.
And sometimes the appliance you want to die will never die.
True. Contacts are being weird. But the one thing I will say is I think when it comes down to all of what we're talking about, and when it comes to repairs, it's kind of the thing that people don't think about when they're buying the house or when they're selling the house until we get into worst case scenarios. And I just think we need to have more education about this is what you should expect. As a buyer, you should expect them to find things that you should be able to just accept that you're going to do a little bit of fixing yourself. There's things that you're going to need to have fixed. As a seller, you need to understand that there's things that you didn't know and you weren't aware of, and it's not your fault, but they are problems and they're going to have to be fixed. And the buyer does not, this is the big one, the buyer does not want to buy your problem, nor do they have to. So the seller sometimes feels like they've got a power position, and sometimes you do, but oftentimes the person who's buying your house has the money.
Yep.
They're the ones that are going to bring the money. Without them, the deal doesn't go through.
Agreed.
And so you just need to be ready for the fact that when they find something that needs to be addressed, you need to be prepared to fix it.
Yep. Agreed.
Or remedy it.
Just make sure you do inspections. And I honestly, 85 to 90% of the time, I ask my sellers to leave during the inspection.
Oh, yeah. They talk too much.
I'm like, what'd you just say to the buyer? Oh, dear. But also they get their feelings hurt because this is
it's like
their
going through your
home.
panty drawer.
Exactly. So I generally ask them to leave so they don't get their feelings hurt. There's been a few where we've had an older home and there's going to be a lot of questions that they're going to ask. And I know the seller can handle it. But also on the buy side,
then, it's always like I always say, be a phone call away for me to ask a question, But and then there are houses that have weird stuff, like weird components and things that they can tell the inspector how things work or where they go that I wouldn't be able to.
But I usually try to not get the buyer and seller in the same room. But the seller is going to be on the defensive because it's somebody coming in to talk about their house.
Yeah.
On the other side with the buyers, I've had people that, they're like, oh my gosh, there's 3 pages of repairs. I'm like, and they're all itty bitty little things. He pointed out everything as the inspector. That's his job. But this is not all things you need to fix. And you have a great house.
Yeah. Well, the other thing we used to have where you said that the seller would agree to pay up to a certain amount of money.
I wish we'd go back to that.
You think that. Let me tell you why we don't have it anymore, because we did it for years. The seller thinks that's the hard limit, and that the seller and the buyer has agreed to that. No matter what they find, they've agreed to only get $1,500. So like they find you need 32 piers and they're like, nope, they got to take the house. I said only 1,500. So sellers would get upset because they thought they had capped out. Buyers would feel like that whatever that number was, they were due no matter whether they found anything or not.
Right.
So if somebody put the $1,500 and they found 2 little things for $200, they're like, I need that $1,300 somewhere else. So that's why it went away. And
I just see it costing sellers so much more now.
I don't know what the answer is, but that was the reason why. And so there's part of me that wishes it would go back, but then a part of me, having lived through that, it was a real problem. So, but the thing is, it's just going to be something you're going to have. That's where you need agents who are really going to work for you, both sides of it, and that are going to work well together, because there's a solution to it. Typically, there's times when they're just not. I mean, there's just times when the buyer's too afraid, too freaked out. It's a problem, and the seller is just too, or the buyer and seller see things very differently of what something's a real problem and what's not. Because a lot of times, like, the seller is like, I've lived with that forever. Like, my favorite is, well, it's been here for 20 some years and been just fine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but if that explodes, if after 22 years that explodes, like if it's an electrical thing that hasn't been a problem yet, great. We're glad it hasn't been. But things happen all of a sudden. And then also, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, you could be in real trouble if they come back on you. So we're really trying to protect you on both sides.
And I've said it before on this podcast, and I'll say it again. One of the best things you can do as an agent is work together with the other agent. Here in Oklahoma, we're transactional.
Yeah.
More
deals blow over agents not getting along than just about anything.
And it's not about you. No, newsflash, not about you.
And do you want it to be?
No.
I don't want it to be. No. I want it to be about what we're doing. Like
that somebody's able to sell their house, somebody's able to buy their house. We're a part of such a special part of people's lives.
I think it's even funny, like, the I don't know if it's so true anymore, but it used to be like the Republicans and the Democrats would fight all day on the floor, but then they'd be at dinner and going to play golf and hang out. Like they were the best of friends, but then they get to work and it was like, I mean, I think sometimes with us, like we forget that, we can still be aggressive and get deals done and make sure we're doing it, but we can still be okay with each other and make sure that we're on the same page. At the end of the day, we want to get something done. It's probably a terrible analogy to use the political system for getting things done, but you know what I mean.
Well, I'm one of the agents we're mentoring. We were co-listing a deal, and several times things came up, and she was really worried that it was going to blow the deal. And I'm like, here are 5 different solutions. Let's figure out which one of these works. Let's get the other agent on board, what works for them.
Yeah.
Then we'll present it to our clients with a solution. And she was like, oh, wow, I hadn't thought about that.
And if it doesn't and it blows, then that's part of it. You did your best. I mean, things do fall apart. But if it's just heartbreaking when things fall apart that really shouldn't have fallen apart.
Yeah.
Like sometimes that knee-jerk reaction to, like, I'll tell people, sit with it. Just sit with it. Don't respond today. Don't respond tonight. Let's just sit with it, and then let's gather back tomorrow and talk. And then the next day they'll be like, you know what? I slept on it. I feel better. They're right. That's a problem. I just kind of, but
for sure.
So much of the time we're such an immediacy, and we think, oh, they told me they're not doing that, and I got to call them and I got to tell them right now. It's like, let's just sit a minute. Let's just take a breath.
Simmer down, simmer
Yeah.
down.
There's sometimes when it's like, no, we got to go.
Yeah.
You know,
Everything's
if
on
a buyer
fire.
is like find something horrible about the house, and they're not going to do it. But the other side too is, and this is really important to know, when you are selling a house, it's very important to know that until you get through inspections, until you agree to everything, until the repairs are in progress and you understand what's being done, you have not sold that house.
No.
It's not sold. And really, it even into the process of getting the repairs done, it can be, it's really tricky because everyone has to be in agreement on that. So the repairs and all that are very important. That's probably the most important part of the transaction, as far as keeping it on track and making it run smoothly, and open communication.
Absolutely.
And realtors, you are not subcontractors.
No.
It's very
not
hard because
inspectors.
you want to get the
We're
deal
not
done, but
subcontractors.
you just remember, like, don't get too into, and we all do it a little bit, but it's like getting too into like managing all the repairs. It's you're taking some liability there because you're putting it together. But the other side of it is that then it's like everybody expects you to perform miracles. And I mean, you can only do what you can do with the people you have. And you can't ask the people that are doing their job to keep taking cuts in their pay to get the deal to work. So
agreed.
It's tricky.
And if you think an agent makes too much money, remember, we start off unemployed every single day. But have a bad business deal and you will completely understand why.
And then
and
then it blows up and you've gone through all that and you have to get everybody out of the deal and you don't get paid for any of it. And everyone's mad at you and everybody else. Yeah. But John, I used to joke because he was an actor on Broadway and and moved home because he was tired of that actor life. And then all of a sudden we're talking and I go, it's kind of like you're still acting because we audition. We either get the job or we don't. Then you got to perform and you have the performance anxiety. Can I do what I said I would do? You got to, it's like there's so much of it. And then it's like every time you sell a house, then you're unemployed again and you're starting over with, the only good news is you could do like 5 or 6 houses at one time where you're listing, whereas a performer, you can pretty much be in one show at a time.
Right.
So you can spread it out a little bit, but it is sort of funny how much of it, but that's self-employment and that's part of it. So,
yeah.
And we love it. Obviously,
I think
we sit and talk endlessly about it, so we might.
Yeah, exactly.
Like
This is our therapy session. Little did you know.
Right.
Little did you know. But yeah, I think we covered a lot of really great things. That inspection period, that TRR, so valuable to both sides.
Yeah, and just being reasonable and putting yourself in the other position and thinking about how you would be if you were in that position. I think that's probably the most that, walking in someone else's shoes really does make a difference.
Absolutely. All right. Well, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. I'm not sure what our topic will be next week, but I'm sure it will be fascinating.
Of course. Thank you, guys. Appreciate you.